Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Speaking Sovereign, Real Conversations for a Graceful Life. I am Matt, as always. I am with Maria. Hello, Maria.
Hi.
And today we have a special guest with us, and our special guest is Christy Morrell-Stinson. Hello, Christy.
Hi, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
It is our pleasure. I'm going to introduce you just briefly here and then go into a longer introduction just after we say a few words. So Christy is a business broker, expansion specialist, and she is joining our conversation today as we talk about the Monday's teaching. And the Monday's teaching was the second week in being sovereign in wealth. And what we talked about Monday was aligning with spiritual principles and how integral that aligning with your spiritual principles is to sovereign expansion, right? This is what we're working on. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful guest. And I just want to say it's not very often that three people who, and our podcast guest, my co-host and myself, we're all in the same town.
Amazing. Right? Yeah.
It's absolutely fantastic. It doesn't happen very often. I mean, you were joining us from Sweden just last week, I think, and now we're all in the same town. So this is going to be a wonderful, energy-filled podcast about sovereign expansion and aligning with your spiritual principles. So it's going to be great. So Christy is an expert in business expansion aligned with sovereign principles. This is absolutely wonderful. So her team and she guides founders of small and large enterprises through imaginative and iterative journeys that result in growing business footprint that is fit for purpose. And this is what we were discussing on Monday as well, fit for purpose. And I believe, Christy, you call them grand odysseys, correct?
Yes, from idea and that first spark of how am I going to bring this to market all the way through fields of lasting legacy, which requires us to invest in the next generation.
Now, when you say lasting legacies, expand on that, because that sounds absolutely amazing.
So that's, beginning with the end in mind. I love the classic Covey 7 habits of highly effective people. And the very first habit is to always begin with the end in mind. And so if you go into business realizing that what you're going to create is going to grow and expand, right? And it's eventually will create fields of lasting legacy, so that there is more than just the day-to-day, right? More than just the transactional effect. That there's an accumulation of wealth, and that wealth shows up in more than just currency, right? The currency part's really important because that's an element that we need, right, to accumulate, and we need that to flow. But there's other types of wealth, and relationship is one of those. So those fields of lasting legacy are built on human relationships, inventions, innovations, creativities that you bring to market, and you serve others in a way that produces more value than you consume. Simplest definition of business and profitability I've ever heard, and that really actually tracks back to Jesus' teachings.
Now, that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you for that explanation. And that goes smoothly into what we were talking about on Monday in stewardship. Yeah. Stewardship of your manna, stewardship of your gifts that you have been given. What do you think, Maria?
Of course, yes. I want to hear Christy talk more about what we're talking about in the group and in these teachings now relate very much to our core values and being aligned with our core values. And I think that from my perspective, that might be easier when you start off. You have this thing in your heart, this mission, and you feel like, yes, this is my mission. This is where God calls me, and this is what I want to do. And how do you stay true to that? How do you anchor into that and stay with your feet in your foundation, in your core values, through the expansion in service, in wealth, the whole way? Because that I feel is really important in all our expansion, to kind of be aligned with the core values and be centered in truth. So what would your take on that be? How do you do that?
So Maria, I love that you talked about anchoring, grounding, and centering, because before you can expand, you have to stabilize. You have to have something solid upon which to build. You have to have a foundation in order to support a first story, second story, all the way up. And the bigger your expansion, the deeper your pylons, the stronger your foundation, and the more you need the earth to support you, right? Yeah. And when I say earth, I think of all of the elements that are there for us, right? Like I think of in the sovereign teaching, it's that substance. You've got to be anchored in substance, right? And so sometimes business expansion can fail if you launch out too fast. You don't have the foundation, you get scattered, and you're trying to do too many things at once. So when you find that happening, retracting back and restabilizing is really, really important. I mean, we see this happen in retailers where they'll shut down a location and they may start retracting. And then if they can get that right, if that big company can get that right, then you'll see them start to expand again. But if they can't get it right, like Sears, I mean, let's just think about that. There was a company that expanded, started small with a single location and then expanded out, right? It's a great American story of Sears department stores. But do you see Sears department stores today? I was in Minnesota last week, and I was driving around a defunct mall, and how they're revitalizing that area now for the community. But I could still see on the bricks where the Sears logo used to be. And it'll be interesting to see how that real estate is repurposed. So that's an example of in any expansion, there is risk. And Maria, you nailed it. It's that grounding, it's that anchoring that's going to bring you back. If there is, I always say there's no failure, there's only learning, right? But if you're going to fail fast and be ready to be humble and retract a bit until you get your bearings again, and strengthen your foundation.
That firm foundation. All right. The house on which I stand, and a firm foundation. We all need it. And so spiritual law relates to business expansion, right? Yeah,
it does. The first law that comes to my mind is cause and effect. Right. Sowing and reaping is like another way of looking at that. And so if we want to achieve something, we have to contribute towards the people that are going to make that happen. Without the market response, there is no business.
Right.
So I think about understanding the market and then putting out those things, sowing the right seed, getting the right message out, providing the right opportunities so that market can respond. And when you see that working and you've got that nice and solid, let's say, for example, you're a fitness center and you have a single location, right? You'd want to know that that single location is performing really, really well before you tried to start and expand it out to other locations. And then you'd want to test and see, is the market in the other geography that I'm looking at, is it a similar market? Right? So that law of cause and effect is going to play into that.
Yeah. How does, explain this to our listeners, how does your knowledge of spiritual law play into your success into your field? You're a business coach, you're helping people expand, you're helping people launch their businesses, but how does your knowledge play into your success? How do you use it every day? And how do you yeah, how do you view your success?
Wow. I'm not sure I even know how to answer that question. I mean, I like to, if I start feeling like I've lost my grounding, I like to go back to the most simple principles, right?
Okay.
And then build upon that. So knowledge is important. You know, being able to see where your challenges are showing up, what laws in effect there, right?
Right.
So I guess that's how I would answer that question, is self-reflection and being really honest about where results are showing up. Like,
Right.
and when I say go back to simplicity, I think of, you know, there's three things that abide, right? There's faith, there's hope, and there's love. And so then I ask myself, is there anything missing? Right?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you truly love and care for the people in your marketplace, I mean, that's going to cover a multitude of issues, right? Like if you're missing something, you're going to have a little more grace in order to fill that gap.
Yeah. And I think that goes very well into teaching on Monday about the reference back to Hevel. You know, I would assume if you're just creating a business to create the business to get the wealth to move on, or if you're creating the business with care, with love, with mercy, with grace, and the market that you're in it because you're in it. I imagine the different energies around those two businesses would be completely different. However, the people participating in those two different businesses may be getting what they see as fulfillment, right? So even though I may not see one or the other as a way to fulfill me, the person participating in it may be completely fulfilled, right?
I think you're right.
So, but it goes back to knowing your core values, knowing who you are, knowing where your passions lead you, know where your Hevel is, and knowing where you have a direct kind of flow of your energy. And that can create a huge expansion into your business. And also
I think the
yourself.
power, you know, Matthew, the power of imagination is what keeps coming to my mind.
Right.
You know, there's a scripture that says, gird up the loins of your mind, right? In one of the versions out there. It means strengthen the power of your imagination. Use your imagination. And the businesses that, you know, if you've been to a restaurant where you can tell nobody's using their imagination here. It's, you know, maybe it's in an area where there's a lot of tourists coming and going. They're doing just kind of a very mediocre job. They're getting, you know, just the least quality food. You look around and you can see it hasn't been cleaned in a while. You know, there's no deep cleaning going on. You know, the bathrooms need attention, that kind of thing. And it just feels a little dull. Versus you go to a restaurant where the owner is highly engaged, the team is you know, they're alive, they're vibrant, they love serving you, you love the food. I mean, there's like just a completely different vibe. Think of Boca in Sarasota as like a really great example of that. If you go into Boca, there's such an energy there, you know, and the people who founded that restaurant are using their imagination to create a human experience that makes people feel cared for, that delights their senses, that is infused with a spirit of excellence.
Yep. Infused with the spirit of excellence. I love that.
Yes.
Absolutely love that. And yeah, when you infuse anything with the spirit of excellence, it becomes excellent, you know? And the imagination, I had a thought pop into my head as soon as you said imagination, and I can't yet grab it. It came in and then it came out. I'm going to try to retrieve it. But Maria,
yes, I keep going back to what I'm hearing from my sovereign perspective and using the sovereign framework for basically my whole life. I'm hearing, don't be afraid of structure.
Yeah.
Structure is our friend. Structure is there to help us frame and organize and, you know, build this ontological sequence in where we can expand. And I'm also hearing you say infuse essence into that structure.
Yes.
Alchemize. So what I'm hearing you say is actually the framework for, you're actually using the sovereign framework for scaling these businesses, just in other words. And I would love to hear your words formulate this. What's your take on this, using, like, merging essence into structure? What would be essence in your world, and what would be structure?
Sure. So essence is going to be that responsive imagination, right? Where you're not just declaring what's going to happen, you're asking questions, right? So there has to be this two-way communication between you and those you choose to serve. And that fuels your imagination. And now you start to imagine, how can I care for these people in a greater way? How can I make their experience richer? How can I make sure that their results are, you know, even better? Where is it lacking in my industry? What are the common frustrations that people have, or the common disappointments that they have? Where are people being exploited in my industry? Where are the small inconsiderations happening? Because it's the little foxes, right, that spoil the vines. There's like a phrase about that. So you want to look for not only the big picture view, but you want to get that kind of more granular feedback. What matters to you and why? Maria, if I was designing necklaces for you, I'm just going to say that because you have the beautiful necklace on. If I was designing necklaces for you, I might want to know, you know, do you prefer a leather strap, or do you prefer metal? Do you prefer a particular design ethic or aesthetic? You know, do you prefer a particular price point? I need to understand my target market really, really well, and then design for them, right? And then if I wanted to expand that, I would want to understand where else are there similar people that have, you know, a similar aesthetic, right? Let me track back to your question, because sometimes I get out there sideways and wait a minute, what was the point here? So imagination is that essence that you're talking about. I believe that. I think it's imagination grounded in love. And then you ask, what about structure, right? How do you infuse that essence into structure? Structure is the theory of business, right?
Yeah.
You know, if somebody goes for their MBA, they're going to learn a lot about the theory of business, and you can't shortcut that. You really do need to understand. Like, if you're going to participate in a particular field, you need to understand it. You need to understand the structure of that field, right? If you're going to practice medicine, then, you know, that's a different type of business than if you're going to design jewelry. If you're you know, if you're going to have a service-based business versus a product-based business, you have to know your numbers. It's a big part of your structures. How do the numbers flow? There's balance and there's not balance. You know, we know that that essence hates a false balance, right? So we want to understand, how do we keep our business in balance? How do we provide something at a fair exchange?
Yeah.
That's an example of structure, right? Your profits have to outweigh your income, has to outweigh your expenses.
Yeah.
You know, so these are basic things.
This is going to lead perfectly. If you're listening now, make sure you tune in for the fourth week, because Elizabeth is going to be talking about business owners and healers and guides in the spiritual realm. So you have to know where you're participating. And I like that you said, know the structure of the area that you're participating in, because, you know, as Maria said earlier, and as Elizabeth said yesterday, the structure is what we use to corral that mana, right? And then that can be directed into real life occurrences, you know, real life manifestations. So use that structure, know the structure, and be sovereign in that structure, right?
That's right. So the discipline of business planning, I do emphasize that, and I do a lot of business planning. And then business planning unfolds into strategic planning, which is more of a how are we going to approach, what decisions are we making about our brand, and how we show up, and
Right.
what business are we in and what are we not in, what are we doing and not doing, and what are the reasons behind that. So all of that plays into your planning, and I believe in the discipline of planning.
It's a good discipline to believe it. Right now, we have 10 minutes left. I want to switch gears just a little bit, and I want to talk about your stewardship of your mana, because you have something called Women, Wealth, and Wholeness. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. This started out as an outreach for an accounting firm. And I was working with this really wonderful businesswoman, and we were digging into, who really is her target market? Who does she have the greatest joy serving? Who responds? And one of the things we discovered is that she really attracted women who were going through difficulty, but had optimism for how they would, be resilient through that process. And so in that discovery, we put this club together, we called it originally Women, Money, and Healing, and it's evolved over time now to Women, Wealth, and Wholeness. And we realized that human wholeness is at the core of our work, something that she and I have in common. And so over time, we've developed this club to offer to women. This is a friendship circle. This is a place where you can ask questions, you can receive mentoring. There are advisors, trusted advisors here. They're not here to sell you on anything. They're here to answer questions and be a guide and provide some mentorship and guidance. And so we really want to see women participating more in, I'll call it big finance, to be able to invest in business, to be able to invest in commercial real estate,
Right.
and to be able to invest in residential real estate and other types of investments, such as art and jewelry. And there's all kinds of creative investments out there. And I know there's cryptocurrency. I'm not an expert in that at all, but we know that there are a lot of people excited about the energy in that field. So we just want women to be able to realize that we can accumulate wealth, and we can do it in synergy in our existing relationships. But it's really time for a lot of transfer of wealth to take place. And so we just want to be, we want to be a place where women can learn about that, participate in that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So we have monthly club meetings here in Sarasota. Our last club meeting was interrupted by an uninvited guest, and so we didn't hold our club meeting during the hurricane. But we would like to get back to that. I believe November 9th in the afternoon we'll be holding that at Berlin Patton Ebling in Sarasota. Yep. And so people could get a hold of me to learn about that. And Matthew, I believe that Elizabeth and I will be putting something really beautiful together with you and your team on that same day at 12 o'clock Eastern time. Do you want to talk about that now, or is that something you'd prefer to share in the chat later?
Well, we'll share that in the chat later, but keep your eyes and ears open.
Awesome.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, how can all of our listeners get in touch with you, Christy?
Sure. Well, I do have a website, syadteam.com. It's short for Significant Advantage, which is my company. So the Syad team is a combination of business coaching, real estate, and mergers, acquisition advisory. So if you go to syadteam.com, we've kind of pared everything way down. We're in a reconstruction phase on our website, but you can still find our business expansion planning there, and you can get in touch with us there.
Wonderful. Maria, any last words?
Yeah, we could try to keep it short. I'm not sure we're going to make it, so please stay tuned.
Go for it.
But I'm thinking about oftentimes when you want to start a business, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is not I need a spiritual director. It's like I need an accountant, or I need like
Yep.
yeah, that structure things. What would you say, or how would you describe the difference? Because I guess you understand. Yes, here we have a company, and they are starting, and they are trying to expand, and then doing all the things without without the essence, without the spiritual direction of things. And here we have one that has that. What would be the difference? What would you say is the difference between those two approaches?
It's a beautiful question. And I think one honors the personal contribution that you can make. I do a lot of teaching on branding. Branding is who people think you are when you're not in the room.
Yeah,
Simple
yeah,
way of saying
beautiful.
that,
Yes,
right? And
brilliant.
so I believe that if you can infuse that spirit of who you are into your brand, and it can speak for you when you're not in the room, that's powerful. And there's a lot. I mean, we could hold a whole session just on that. That's one thing that's really, really important. I believe that the quality of our results relate to directly tied to the quality of our questions. So having a spiritually aware coach or advisor in your world, and not just one, maybe over time you create that circle of advisors to ask you the hard questions, to ask you the deep questions, ask yourself, spend time meditating on what are the results that I really want, and what's the structural business planning that's going to produce those results. Results are produced through process, which is how we do things and when we do things, and they're produced through people who run that process with resources that enable them. So there's your secret code, right? To how do you produce results? You've got to have a process of how and when. You've got to have a who and a where. And then you have to have a what are they using in order to run that process. And everything ties back to that structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I keep listening. I want to listen even more, but we're gonna end this now. But
Sure.
I also, one last thing that for me I keep coming back to, not just right now but overall in my life, it's I know who I am and I know how I serve, and that kind of realigns me with truth and kind of places me on my core values, even if I sometimes wander off. I know who I am, I know how I serve, and then from there I can find direction. So yeah, I'm gonna end this talk with that.
Well said, Maria.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And yeah, that was a wonderful question. I'm sitting here thinking about it, and we discuss this a lot. And spiritual directors, we feel, are as important as your accountant, as your lawyer, as your advisors. Spiritual directors need to be on that team with you. So as Christy said, they can ask those tough questions, those deep questions, to help you align yourself and your business as quickly as possible to the pure diamond consciousness that Jesus is and that God is pouring through him. So align yourself, get that spiritual director.
Yes, do it. And also, I did design this necklace. I made it myself.
Beautiful. Love it.
I got that said too.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christy, for being with us today. Thank you, Maria. Thank you for listening, everyone. If you are a member of the Oasis, remember tomorrow we have a drop-in session at 12 EST. And as always, this is not recorded to provide a safe learning environment for all who attend. Maria will be leading that session tomorrow. Also, if you're part of our 4-week deep dive into being sovereign in wealth, the assignment has been posted in the group chat. And you should probably look for an additional assignment on Friday, I would imagine.
You should.
A nod of the head from Maria. Yes. And I would like to end with this. And this is from D. Alexander Orndorff. And it says, no man can become rich without enriching others. Anyone who adds to prosperity must prosper in turn. Have a wonderful weekend. We are Speaking Sovereign.
Thank you.